Hello, and welcome back to the JRB podcast with myself, Ryan Levine, joined here by Jeff Jones and Bohdan Temnick.
What's up? It's been a minute.
It
Hey,
has it has been a while, for various reasons. We've kind of all been, the 250th happened. Bohdan went to London, and then there were just other
We all
events.
have
Yeah,
bad mental health. All right,
yeah,
yeah. All of us have mental health problems and didn't know how to deal with it.
yeah. There you
hmm
go. Yeah, sure. So the first thing I kind of want to talk about today. So first of all, I appreciated all the comments in the last one that we did when we talked about Vanquish Soul in the last. That was a while ago. Oh my god, that was a month
hmm
ago. We've really been neglecting this. Anyways, but a bunch of people said the cards they were looking forward to. Since then, the last Vanquish Soul card has been revealed, and it was nothing like we thought it would be. And it is a consistency spell card, but it's doesn't have Vanquish Soul in the name, so you can't search it off of
Oh yeah,
the.
that card's neat.
Yeah, but
No, neat.
anyways, yeah,
Yeah,
but
merge
not
artwork.
quite. Yeah, it was e-telly, but not searchable off the spell. So the spell search girl doesn't. It's weird, but we'll talk about that
Mm.
when those cards actually come out in the TCG or in the OCG. Then we'll talk about the. Well, they're out, but anyways, when it's relevant for us again, we'll talk about them again. But so real quick, just to go over the 250th, which was at this point, over a week ago. Well, yeah. What was really anything to take away from it? Like Kashira won two of them and Sprite won the third one, and
hmm
like Kashira was most of Top Cut in all of them. Like nothing
Yeah,
unexpected, right?
Yes.
it like it's alarming. I think the conversion, not even the conversion. I think like it was like pretty even based on like round one deck representation into top 32 for like most events from like the information that we
Hmm.
did have.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Um, there was something interesting that I like randomly got someone mentioned it to me is that they have a program for the people in like the feature match area, so like the commentators and the people picking the feature matches, and you can just like search individual cards and it'll bring up every deck list, which I think is kind of crazy. um well, like it's expected, right, with like online deck list submission. But I think like they probably have so much like data from these events with online deck list submission that they can probably do some really cool things with the ban list solely off that alone. Even though we know that probably won't happen. But
Well,
yeah,
I mean
so
that's
keep that
so
in mind.
technically they've always had access to deck lists, but but I know what you
Yeah,
mean in
but
that
now they
it's
can
way
just like
easier to to
type it
to
in and it
quantify it.
pops up. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like because all deck lists are submitted online, I guess, except for Latin
Mhm.
American events are not online. But for all North American and European events, yes, since all the deck lists are online, the data is much more easily parsed, and they can
Yeah.
probably
But like
see much
they
clearer
it's
pictures
more
than they
like
could before.
YGO scope that you can probably like, you know, just see at the drop of a hat
Hmm.
through like random coding. I
Yeah.
think is like, but it's something that you expect to be a thing, but just
But it
knowing
wasn't
how
the
like
case until this year.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much.
So, and
It
yeah,
was
I
very
do hope.
funny.
I mean, Master Duel also probably, although it's not applicable to the TCG format because it's kind of on an 8 month delay at all times.
Mm,
I imagine the way that they hit things also is much more database because they just have just such a higher, density of games being played.
mm.
That they can really see which cards are problematic. And we've kind of seen them in Master Duel hitting a bunch of the cards that are just the highest win rate cards. They've been doing it for Duel Links for a while now too. But yeah, I would hope that they'll look at the data and now not just by archetype, but by like specific cards being played because now it's much easier for them to do
Mm.
that. And then maybe we'll see more tangible hits on the list because of
Hmm.
that. But the next event is SIAC legal. I don't believe. Are there any like nationals in Latin America or Europe before SIAC?
Um,
I don't think
There is.
so.
I don't
I
know
think they
about that.
start about the same time.
Yeah.
So like
So
they're
it.
all like they're like there's like a time frame between like May and then like June. I think the last nationals in June is like the 17th
Yeah.
or
So
something.
there's
Yeah.
only regionals now for the Hypernova season. Yeah. And then
hmm
everything else, all the next premier event, I believe, is going to be SIAC. So I don't, it's maybe early to declare this format over, but it's like, even if we don't we could get a list, and even if we don't, it's a new set with a lot of cards that we have talked about previously.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like Syac has a
My
lot of strong
issue with
cards.
all of that is the more I look at everything, the more you sort of just hate Kashtira.
Yes,
Which is really
Kashtira
funny because like
gatekeeps a lot of
yeah.
decks. I agree.
Well, we were so welcome to like such a powerful deck like Kashtira coming into the format because you went from like tier where the innovation level is kind of low to like
Yeah.
the current list where it's like there's a wide range of decks. Then you have Syac coming out where there's like, oh, here's a couple more decks that you can play that are good. But again, and I feel like I've said this every time I've talked to someone. Like I talked to Lithium, I talked to Max. I've said every deck that comes out, nothing is strictly better. Everything plays the exact same power level, which is just like ridiculously oppressive. It'll do something crazy on like turn one, or it's completely unplayable into the opponent's board, or like a Rise Heart, right? That's just like all it is. So like you just have to build your deck in these really awkward ways. I think Jeff put it best when he talked about Droll and Lockbird, where he's like, anytime Droll is good, the format is shitty, and then that's like a big one. And I think that's the same thing. It's like, is Yu-Gi-Oh good? Because there's a lot of like viable decks. Yeah, no, of course. Like, but that's not good in like the competitive aspect because you literally have to sit there and play a guessing game and verse like the wrong half of the field and like try and offset it certain ways. And like your tournament experience probably just won't, go the way you want it to. Or it will, and like everything's great and you'll sing your praises of the format. But yeah.
So we've talked about this many times, but I think now I've said it enough that I can summarize it much more succinctly. I do not like the formats where there are like 10 different decks that are all doing such drastically different things. Your tournament feels like it's determined by what matchups you're just playing against. I also think
it's when everything's so powerful, right? Like everything is just like ridiculous.
But, yeah, but it's also
so
when there's only one deck, I see why people think it's boring. I've enjoyed some of the one deck formats. Like obviously, I very much enjoyed Spiral. I did not much enjoy Zodiac. And I think tier mirrors were pretty fun at like the top level, but I see how it gets exhausting. And towards the end of it, I can see how it does get boring and we do need changes. My favorite formats, I think the formats I had the most enjoyment just playing the game are formats like 2015 after all the WCQs, where there were like, I'd say Nekroz and Burning Abyss were the two best decks. And then there were some viable decks being Shadal, Cliffort, and then if you go a little, Ritual Beast, and if you go a little bit lower than Teller Knight. Post Jin Ban, yeah. I like that too. Is my favorite where and what I think are so good about those formats is there are not so many decks that you cannot be prepared for a tournament, and yet there are enough decks that have different play styles that no matter how you like to play the game, there is a deck for you. It might not necessarily be your favorite deck, but there will be a deck that fits your play style, right? Like if you don't like the way Nekroz plays, you can try to play BA. If you don't like how BA plays, you can play Cliffort. If you don't like how Cliffort plays, you can play Shadal. And if none of those decks do it for you, I'm sorry, I don't know what you want. Those decks all play very, very differently.
Well, so like this is more hindsight, right? Yeah. But, like you look at it, and so that's the thing. Back then, people were just like, "Oh man, like it's very funny to look back on because like we're complaining now of like everything's just doing like all these crazy things, blah blah blah." Yeah. But like back then, it looked like everything was doing crazy things like relative to what the game was maybe a year before.
But it just wasn't. I know what you mean.
It just wasn't. Like looking back on it, it's like I feel a lot better if my like. Do I feel bad if my opponent resolves Shadal Fusion and gets crazy value? Sure. However, it wasn't as game breaking as like the current
like a +2
format.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It's like it's like
there was a lot more playback. I think the other one that we always talk about is like, oh, Nekroz of Trishula is so oppressive, blah blah blah. But it's like, no, you sort of just didn't care. After a while, like if you weren't playing incorrectly, usually we're like able to get trished or like baited them to trish you, and it was just like usually the incorrect play at the time as well. I think the only real oppressive thing that I think stood out for me in that format specifically, similar to like what a Rise Heart was maybe Unicore. Like Unicore.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes Flossalis, but not to the same extent.
Yeah, of
Unico was
course.
probably the biggest one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Which
then you
is
had your obvious
something.
you had your floodgates in like BA and Ritual
Yeah.
Beast and Flipfort and stuff like that. But that was whatever. That was
More
just like
manageable.
expected because those decks could never kill you when you got turns, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like a lot of the decks now that can floodgate you,
You're
kill
just
you
dead
on
in
the
two. Yeah,
following
you're just
turn.
dead in 2 turns.
Yeah.
Like even like
Yeah, pretty much.
Labyrinth, or like, to go back a little further, even like Eldritch should just be like they floodgate you, and then Golden Lord's almost 4,000 attack. Like, you die in 2 turns. Like, you will get 1 additional draw phase to draw the out, and if you don't, you are dead. And like, yes, back then that's not really what happened. You know, like, you got like 2 or 3 turns, sometimes even more, depending on what you could do. But yeah, so
Well, yeah. Well, to be fair, like I do remember like watching Jeff like when he would play the Shadol deck, and I think like the Shadol deck had like more reach than a lot of the other decks as well. That was like the other scary thing. That was sort of like the evolution of, oh hey, like this deck can play floodgates and it can sort of like kill you. I guess Clifford sort of maybe had that argument too. It just never felt like I was ever dying because I feel like the cards you were summoning were mostly just like not as ridiculous, right? Like you're summoning a bunch of Clifford monsters, or like you have towers and a guy. It's like that's gross, but I don't know. Hindsight 2020,
yeah.
2015.
So with Syac coming out, and as you mentioned, just bringing all of these, you know, like, it brings a bunch of new cards, a bunch of new decks, and it makes me think back to not too long ago, about a year ago, with Dimension Force, and that set wasn't a crazy high power level, but it just brought a couple more decks on the fringe of viability, and that was when we just had like 6 different decks that just fiber scythed you, you know, and like that was the format. And it's like, you can, like, on the very surface level, you can look at it and be like, there are so many decks. There's like the adventure synchro decks, there's like punk decks that might also play adventure, you know, there's like Sword Soul, there's Branded, and then it's just like, okay, but almost all of these decks are just trying to floodgate you and kill and just prevent you from playing. You know, like, it's just not like, all of them kind of just have the same win con and go about it differently, so they lose to different cards when they try to achieve the same thing, and it's just a very frustrating play pattern in general. So I'm hoping Syac doesn't turn into that, and I'm kind of fearful that post Battles of Legend, when we get Assault Synchron, if there's a list that answers Kashtira and not much else, I am kind of afraid that we'll just see a ton of different flavors of weird synchro combos with the super heavy samurai stuff, and the assault synchrons and the bistrels and the mana domes, and just like, it's just all gonna be a different coat of paint on the same. Like, every deck will make 6 level 10 synchros, and you'll just kind of sit there twiddling your thumbs and be like, yeah. You know, and that'll be it. Which I am kind of not necessarily looking forward to, but we'll see. Obviously, there's a lot that can change between
the biggest thing with that though is, if you look at the event schedule, there is like a lull in June of like almost no events. I think actually
probably just nationals, right? I think the national schedule got posted today.
June 17th, I think, is like the last national event, like I said before.
Yeah.
So you could have Cyberstorm access be legal for Philadelphia and Santiago, and then it'll end up just being like, oh, these are problems from Cyberstorm access. Let's, like, amend them by June 10th or something. You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't matter. I think it's like the other wild thing where it's like, there's all these like arbitrary rules that like aren't necessarily rules that have to be followed, of like, oh, national season, well, this should be the same season as, like, oh, it's the same ban list as all the WCQs, or like all the WCQs should be the same ban list. Haha. You know what I mean? Just like all these weird ones. Nah, like, if there's a problem, I think you should fix it as soon as you can.
Yeah.
And try and like put a list out. Like, if you sit down and play Philly and there's just a bunch of like super heavy samurai FTK like going wild, that, then maybe you should just ban or any all of the cards that are facilitated. But
yeah, I agree. But yeah, so I guess one thing I do want to transition into is, I don't really want to talk about Yu-Gi-Oh specifically for the next big chunk of this. The three of us have all been, I guess not necessarily different games. We've all been learning new card games in the past month or so, maybe 2 months. I believe you and Jeff have been trying to pick up Battle Spirits. I just started playing the My Hero card game, and I want to take this opportunity to kind of share our experiences with getting into new games, because something that when I was coaching a lot more often, that I would get asked a lot would be something like, how do you approach getting into a game? And that was always such a weird question for me, because I haven't gotten into a game since 2006. Like that was when I got into Yu-Gi-Oh! Really. And I know for you two, it's even longer than that. And the environment surrounding, all these communities has changed so much that it's very, very different. So I do kind of want to share our experiences with how we've been approaching getting into new games, and hopefully, you can translate this experience if you're just getting into Yu-Gi-Oh! Or you haven't been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! for that long, within the couple months or years, or you are also trying to get into some of these new games that are all coming out, because there are a lot of games coming out. This can be valuable. So I know.
So something I do want to ask you,
Mhm.
Ryan, is you're talking about you don't really get into new games, but I know that you've also played Hearthstone before.
Yeah, that's a little different. I actually, when I said I don't really get into new games, I was gonna say, I guess I almost said except Hearthstone, but it's a little different because it's an online only game. So there's not really like, I don't go to Hearthstone locals. I don't like travel to Hearthstone events. Like
Well, I
it's
think when you more like I was going to ask you like how did you approach getting into that game?
okay, yeah. I mean, because I definitely had a phase where I was trying to play Hearthstone a lot more competitively. I think I peaked around, like, I think I was like top 80 legend at one point, just when I was like super super into it. And then I know Jesse got to like top 16 for one season, but
Mm-hmm.
that was one where I just kind of looked at a bunch. I tried to look at all the resources that were available. Hearthstone, because it is sort of it's more of an esport than most of these other games, and like Blizzard really used to kind of push the esport aspect of it. There was a lot of content and a lot of information surrounding the competitive scene, and there are a lot of competitive Hearthstone content creators, way more so than Yu-Gi-Oh. I
Well,
would
way more than
say
like most
way
games,
way way
right?
more
Because
than
the
most
data was
games.
all there.
Yeah.
Like when you look at like the Hearthstone data management versus something like Pokemon TCG or like Magic Arena or Magic Online, I feel like it was just night and day, because you were able to get like all of these numbers just at the drop of a hat. Everything was ripped, everything was scraped. So many games were being played that you could just determine win percentages, and like the tier list was literally right in front of you. Like it didn't really matter.
Yeah,
It
and
was
that's
awesome.
one thing that I'm really into data and numbers, and I do that a lot more for Yu-Gi-Oh than I think a lot of people do, in terms of just actually doing the math behind a lot of my decisions in deck building. And for Hearthstone, as you said, all those numbers are there, and you can sort it by rank, you can sort it by region, and you can really pick up on these trends and you can really, really, really hone in on the skill level that you are. So, like, at one point when I was just starting out, it doesn't really help me to look at the win rates of the decks at top 100 legend, because I don't know how to play. I'm not good.
Mm.
I need to look at the win rates of decks at the lower skill levels while I'm still learning the game, and that will give me, the competitive edge in my elo. And then as I get better, I can adjust accordingly. And that is something that was available to me in that game, and I think I could utilize really well, just because that's the type of thing that I like to do anyway. And now, actually, that's a good transition for my hero. It is kind of the complete opposite. This game has been out for about a year. It is a spin-off of UFS, which is another card game. Anyone who's playing card games for a million years has probably heard of UFS. Basically, it's UFS is like a game engine, and then they get like licensed properties and they make sets based on different games, and then they all use the same rule set and the same card structure. So you could play like Soul Calibur cards against like Mega Man cards, and like that was the whole thing. And then
Yeah.
recently in the last year, they made a new format where it's only My Hero cards. So while while on the one hand, it is still a UFS game, so it's technically a game that's been out for a long time, only 4 sets are legal. So the mechanics are not new, but the whole card pool is new. With a couple exceptions, they've, like retrained some cards from old UFS that were like staples. But for the most part, they're unique cards. So it's kind of an interesting situation where on the one hand, there's a lot of information on UFS about like the general rules of deck building and the math behind how their game systems work. But since the card pool is so new, there are sometimes gaps in understanding of the power level of certain strategies, right? Or like there's not really much of a consensus. I think a bunch of people in the community right now have a consensus on what like the top deck is. And then beyond that, there's a bit of an information gap. Also just because there's a smaller player base than a bunch of the other games, right? Like there's a smaller player base than Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic and whatever, but there's still enough documentation that learning is still accessible, but I think it's less solved than a bunch of these other games could be. But I've only been playing for about 2 months, so I truly don't know, and there's still a lot that I haven't figured out yet. But it has been an interesting experience when my only real experiences of getting into games have been Yu-Gi-Oh! Years and years and years ago, where I played very, very casually for years and years. And then around 2013, I started playing competitively. So I was playing very casually for like 7 years. And then started playing competitively. And then, the rest for the last 10 years, I think a lot of, my journey competitively is just online now. And you can probably find videos of me with deck profiles I've made of decks literally spanning back for almost 10 years now. So you can see how I've changed in my approach to, playing the game and whatever. But then Hearthstone was all online, so there wasn't really an in-person community that I was interacting with, and a lot of the improvement I had was through consuming competitive content, looking at all the numbers, and that kind of thing, which was very different from Yu-Gi-Oh! But a lot of the skills I picked up playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Competitively definitely helped me, jumpstart Hearthstone, and I didn't stay completely inept for very long, because I knew how to learn, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
I'd like to believe for my hero, because now this is the 3rd game I've really tried to learn, I would by no means say I am good. I've been playing for 2 months, but I think I have more or less skipped the completely inept stage, where I know enough to look at tournament results, parse through the decks, and at least have a grasp of what decks are playable and an understanding of the metagame, and at least learn to play with like a meta relevant strategy. So I have a chance of winning, even on day 1. Like I think the second locals I entered, I was playing like a variant of like the second best deck. So I was like winning games, which I didn't think I would that quickly. But
So random, but wait. So how many people do you get playing the game at the local you play at?
I think we every week I've gone, there've been more than 8 and fewer than 16.
Okay.
I think the most we had was like 13.
Okay.
Yeah, like it's a pretty small locals, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
like my Yu-Gi-Oh locals. Over the last 2 years, it's been growing a lot. And the last time I went to my Yu-Gi-Oh locals, we had 45 people. So
Right. Yeah, like
it is
very
kind of
similar.
crazy. Yeah.
Where Michigan, our locals are like between 35 and 50 people every
Hmm.
Wednesday and Friday.
Yeah.
Um, and it's very hard to find people who play other games. Like even like Magic, like Friday Night Magic, has like 20 people at like most stores, and any other
I
game is like
I
very,
think
very
there's another
competitive.
issue with stuff like that though for Magic. I feel like there's oversaturation of like there's so many random stores, and by random I mean relative to like a Yu-Gi-Oh player, right? There's just stores that host FNM, and they're all like in the same proximity, and they all host them on Friday.
Yeah.
And it's
Yes.
Less.
like,
Yeah.
how many of you people like are going to go? Like, you can't be in 4 places at once. So like, obviously, you're spreading it out, and now it's like 20, but like 20 over how many stores, and like the one random store you've never heard of or seen, but it's on the fucking WPN dual starts
Right.
list.
They have
Yeah,
they have like they have like 8, one of them has 10. Like
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which for Yu-Gi-Oh, which is like kind of funny that maybe the branding of Friday Night Magic has like split it too thin, right? Where like for Yu-Gi-Oh, it's just
hmm
like all the stores in my area just look at each other's calendars and host Yu-Gi-Oh on different days.
Yeah, that's what I'm
You
saying.
know?
All the ones that are
Yeah.
like, if you're within like 30 minutes of each other, the stores just like hold them on different days. Yeah.
Yeah.
you have to. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
the way around it. Uh,
But going back to how Ryan was saying that he feels that like he's can kind of more easily grasp in new games, especially this one after a couple weeks. I think something that I've said this for a long time. I think that if you play Yu-Gi-Oh as your main game, you can go to basically any other game and be successful because I think Yu-Gi-Oh is just the most complicated game. And I always think that,
I'm
you
sure
know, so
everyone that plays Magic will say Magic's the most complicated game. So I just want to preface this that
I don't
no,
think
I
that's true. I
sure,
don't think
sure.
that's true. I see Magic players all the time, like especially at our locals who are like read our cards. I watched a Magic player who is friends with our Yu-Gi-Oh player at our
Mhm.
locals. He was watching the runic deck be played, and
Yeah.
he was just like, "What the fuck is going on? This is like it was just crazy." He was
Yeah.
losing his mind. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's way easier to go from Yu-Gi-Oh to other games. I found that to be true, at least for me. But I think I'm also just because I love new games so much.
Mhm.
I think it also is easy for me to transition to other games. Like when Force of Will came out, I started playing Force of Will and I topped like the top aided the first Force of Will regionals. I topped like the first like when ARG was doing it, like the very first Force of Will event that they
Mhm.
did. Back in the day, like I like even like topped like a Magic regionals back in like the very first Ravnica block. And so card games have always just come kind of easy to me, but I think Yu-Gi-Oh specifically has set me up and will set others up for a more successful future in other games because Yu-Gi-Oh is so complicated. Going into anything else just seems like child's play.
Sure. I can definitely
Except,
agree there's more moving part. Like I will definitely say like the mechanics of Yu-Gi-Oh are probably the least similar to a bunch of other games, if only because there's no like resource system, but at the same time there's so much going on that if you can have a grasp of it, and obviously like the basic mechanics of like card advantage and like tempo and like value obviously translate to every game, so if you have become proficient, then there are a lot of concepts that carry over. I do agree.
as I say, maybe the one difference is I think that like UFS, it was like an overly complicated game.
Sure. I will
Uh,
say every card has like 19 numbers on it. And it was
yeah,
very daunting the first time I picked up a card, and there are literally like 7 numbers on every card. And I'm just like, what? And I think it's funny to go from, it's like I pick up a Yu-Gi-Oh card with 17 paragraphs of text that people are like, "Oh my god, this card is so complicated." And it's just like a pendulum monster. And I'm like, this does 2 things. And then I try to look at a UFS card, and there's like a number on the top left, a number on the top right, a number on the bottom right, 2 numbers in the middle, an arrow, and I'm just like, what is going on? Like what is happening? So, ugh, I do agree, but I guess I kind of want to move into the game that you two have been playing. You both started playing. So my game is not a new game. The My Hero game, as I explained, the My Hero variant has been out for about a year. You guys just started learning Battle
well,
Spirits, which is a
do I
brand
have
new
something to
game.
tell you about Battle Spirits?
Yeah.
Also not a new game.
Oh no.
It technically
Uh
is.
oh.
Yeah.
that is true. That is true. Battle Spirit did originally come to
Uh,
America many years ago and
Dude,
failed.
I saw
I
a
had no
video. This
idea.
is this is really funny. Let me shoehorn this in there. I was watching a video, and it was like a random match from 2010, and in the background is just a Battle Spirits poster, and I had to double take, and I'm like, oh wait, no, this happened. Never mind.
Uh,
Yeah.
Also, before I forget, because I wanted to say something before Ryan switched over
Yeah.
with UFS. My Hero cards not only have like 10 different numbers, they also have like 10 different symbols on them.
Yes,
And
they
each of
all.
them have
It
They,
and
looks
each
it
of them
looks
mean
really
each
cluttered.
of them mean
Yeah.
a different thing that you don't know what it means unless you already know.
yeah, I do agree with that. I do agree. I the first time. So how I learned to play is actually, I guess this will be the last thing I talk about for this, for my piece before you guys go into yours. But how I learned to play is actually somebody in the local community used to play Yu-Gi-Oh like years and years and years ago, and I think he was never really playing the same time I was, but he went to the same locals that a lot of my current friends do. So like Calvin and everyone used to go to locals with him, so they're Facebook friends with him, and they've like they've known him for a long time, and they don't see him frequently, but they play poker with him sometimes, so they've still like kept in contact with him. And he posted about the My Hero game on Facebook, and he's like, "Hey, I'm like a judge in My Hero, and this locals is doing a demo day. So if you show up, you get a demo deck and whatever." And we looked it up, and the locals was 5 minutes away from our house, and we were just like, "We've never heard of this locals before." And we go, and there's this locals. I don't even know how to describe it. Okay, so it was a locals that I don't even know how this arrangement works. So, the outside of the building, there is a sign for a bank, and that is the only sign on the outside of the building. If you walk into the building, if you go straight, you are going into the bank. If you go left, there are offices for the bank. If you turn right, there is a staircase that leads you to a locals with no branding. So we literally had no idea this existed, and there was just a locals in the attic of a bank that had My Hero, I guess. So
Again, these are the FNMs that just randomly show up.
yeah. Pretty much. Like when we were using the GPS to get to the locals, it had the address, and we show up, and it's a bank, and we're like, surely it's the building next door. So we go to we walk in circles for 12 minutes until we get back to the bank and find out that it's upstairs above the bank. Anyways, very bizarre. Like, but yeah, so we went to this locals that was advertised by somebody who used to play Yu-Gi-Oh and now plays this game, and then we did the demo day, and I thought it was fun enough. I bought a starter deck, and I had the demo deck, and I started playing, and then now I just go to the locals every week, and I play. I go to the locals once a week to play constructed, and I go to the locals once a week to play sealed. So just so I learn what more of the cards do that are from the older sets that I haven't played, that were out before I started playing. So yeah, it's been kind of interesting. But anyway, Battle Spirits. Let's talk about that now.
Yeah, so Battle Spirits originally was a game that they brought to the US and did not do well many, many years ago. I don't know the exact date, but it
I'd
was
never heard of it
definitely
previously, so it must have done
It was like
awful.
09
Sure,
ish.
sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um but it kept going on in Japan, and is Bandai's, I'm pretty sure it is their biggest game in Japan. And it's been going on ever since. So what happened was they decided to take their more modern eyes. Obviously, as time goes on, a game changes, right? So they're like, oh, what if we take our battle spirits, kind of how the game is now and how it's changed in like their 2023 environment, and re-release it as a new game in the Western audience. So now what we get is Battle Spirit Saga, which is kind of like the more updated version of the game that solved a lot of the tried solving a lot of the problems the original game had. And so if you played the original game, you might understand a little bit what's going on with Battle Spirit Saga, but there are updates and new kinds of cards and rules to how the game plays to make it feel better than that original kind of disaster. And the biggest draw to this is that Battle Spirits is Bandai is offering a crap ton of money for people to come play their game. Not only this, they are putting a crap ton of money into advertising. They're getting like really famous people to promote their game,
Oh
like
yes,
randomly
the Avril
Avril
Lavigne.
Lavigne.
That
Hmm.
was the craziest thing I'd ever seen. Just that Avril Lavigne tweet about Battle Spirits.
Yeah. So now I'm waiting. Like, I bet there's going to be like another crazy thing they're gonna do eventually, and I just wonder who next famous is going to be promoting Battle Spirit. So I kind of am waiting for that to happen because I think it's very silly. But yeah, they had their first tournament the week before the 250th. Um, I was going to go, but then stuff happened and couldn't go to either of these events. But the winner got, was it 25, Boden?
Yeah, it's scaled differently depending on which region you're in. So it was like
Yeah, that's right.
Europe
Yeah,
and
so
America had 25 thousand for first, and then Australia and Latin America had 10,000 for first. But like if you see the numbers and you see the prize breakdown, it's crazy. I got $500 for coming 17th with like a record that just wasn't good at all, and I was sick. I was like, oh my god. The UK one was even more ridiculous. It's 128. It was 176 people or something, and it paid out top 128 minimum $250.
there you go. So
Yeah.
they are paying out a lot of money, and
Mhm.
I think they said $1 million worth of money over the course of the next year of events, or
Yeah.
something like that. And they announced their next two tournaments, which is in California and Ohio. And these are kind of like their regionals, which gives you an invite to, I believe, their world championship. I think that's what it is. And
So these ones qualify you for the Pro Tour.
the
And the
Pro
Pro Tour
Tour, yes.
happens every time a set comes out. And they'll alternate like North America, Europe, and then like the regionals, well, like technically regionals, they're called Grand Opens, and like top 32 of each Grand Open qualifies for the Pro Tour, and then top 32 of the Pro Tour, I think, or it might be top 64 of each Pro Tour. They qualify for Worlds at the end of the year, or like beginning of the year. So yeah, that's another crazy one. There's like a bunch of like event solicitation and stuff like that they sent to distributors, and it like tells you the breakdown of like how much money is in each event. I think Worlds has like $275,000 like given out for like 192 people. So we're interested with like how that'll break down in the pricing distribution for that. Like, will first place get 100K? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Will it be something
Yeah.
ridiculous like that?
But I know that, yeah, the events for the what are they called? The grand are they what are they called? The
Grand Opens, yeah.
grand opens, yeah. So for the first two, for these first place, you get $6,000,
Step
and
7,000, right?
I'm pretty sure it's six, unless because when I signed up for it, let me look at
Let me
my.
double check because they messed up what they posted. Because I'm
Oh, did they
pretty
mess up what they
sure
posted? Okay, well,
they messed up something. Well, they also just removed the pricing details on the ticket website.
Uh-oh.
oh,
Oh
they
wait,
did
maybe not.
because my
No, no,
when I,
seven. It's 7,000,
okay, it was 100.
3,000,
I have a
15.
screenshot on my phone that says
Yeah,
6,000, so they definitely changed it. Okay, so that's better. So yeah, first place gets $7,000, and what was second?
3,000, and then it's 1,500 third and fourth, 1,000 fifth through eighth, 500 ninth through 16th, and then 250 17th and 32nd. But it's the Pro Tour invite for when you top 32 that I think is probably like not worth more, but it's compounding, right? Like if you cash one of these events, you get these invites to another tournament, and if you cash that event, you get an invite to another tournament while also getting paid out. I think is really cool because like these events will probably be smaller than a YCS, right?
Right,
And
right.
their
Like
top
I'm gonna say
32
these will
payout.
be like Yu-Gi-Oh regionals, where like they
Yeah,
probably have
like
like
literally
200
just
people.
And like you just have to top 32, which is like when you play a YCS. This is like the other thing I think as well. Like this is something I didn't really touch on for like the 250th YCS. When you have 3,000 plus people and it's top 64 in 12 rounds, and it's like yeah, like that distribution works out. Like every X2 should top, and then like a good chunk of like X2 one, maybe an X3 sneaks in, right? Like obviously X3 didn't sneak in, but I think for that many people, you need to look at a different tournament structure entirely. I don't know how you would do it. Um, Maybe it would be like how Pokemon does like day 1A, day 1B for like worlds and stuff like that. That could be like a consideration. But when I look at like events like these and they're small and they pay out really nice to like top 32, and you don't have to be like the top 3% of the field or something, or less than that. It's 3,000 people. It's like you have to be the top 1% of the field. You know what I mean? Like that's ridiculous. Like poker tournaments pay out top 10% of the field from like 10,000 people or something, and that's like way more reasonable. But it's like, no, no, no. You made top 64 in a 3,000 person event. Here's the playmat. You're like, oh, okay, kind of sick.
Yeah. That was that I mean that really is like hurtful to me because I remember at the 200th I got first after Swiss, and then I lost in the first round of top 64,
That's another crazy one, right? Like that's
and I walked
disgusting.
away. I had to walk away with a mat. What was even worse is they didn't even have the mats yet, and they had to mail
Yeah.
me that. So I walked away from going first in Swiss with nothing,
Mm.
nothing. I couldn't like I was my heart hurt so bad
Yeah.
that's what it was like, and I feel like this is like random off topic tangent, which will always happen, but I think that the person who gets first after Swiss should get a special prize from Konami for going undefeated, which would also help deter people trying to force draws.
Oh,
Because
that's
if
a good point. Yeah.
you would want to get first because of that. And then it also
Mhm.
means that like, oh, you did so good. You went 12 you go 12 and 0. If you go 12 and 0 at the biggest event of like the year, you should get something beyond a freaking mat, right? And you should just be
Back
rewarded for
in the day, do you remember the regionals that would give something out to people
Yeah,
that came
we
first
talked
after
about that
Swiss?
before. Yeah, like
Oh yeah,
way back in the day, we got like iPods and stuff at regionals for
yeah.
going like undefeated in Swiss or going first after Swiss.
And then you
And
have other games where it's like first after Swiss gets like the high, the high seeding pick. Like obviously that one's a bit more convoluted, but like I think other games do give you like a soft buff if you went undefeated in Swiss. I think some give you like a buy into like the round of like round of 16 or something in like a top 30. Just weird things, like weird little things that you can sort of like maybe adapt. I'm not sure how you would do it,
I mean, even if they
but that
didn't
could be
want
a
to like do something like
consideration.
that, they could literally it would literally just cost them nothing to be like,
Yeah.
hey, you got first after Swiss. Here's like this fucking. It could literally just be it can literally be any Konami product that isn't a mat. It costs
Mm.
them like nothing. Or they could just spend an extra $100 and like, oh look, here's like an extra game system for you for getting first after Swiss. It literally would cost them like pocket change to just give something else
Mm.
away. Worth just that would just make it not feel bad for getting first after Swiss and just losing in top cut. Um, but I digress.
Mm.
Back to Battle Spirits. Yeah, you get with all of this.
Yeah.
It may
Let's like sort of break down like how the not how the game is played to go like crazy. I think
How did you guys get okay, so I guess what I want to know
mm,
is how did you approach learning it? Because
how did
it's not a new
uh
game, I guess.
the
I thought it was. It's
so
not a new game.
they give out like demo decks, right? Like obviously Bandai is throwing like a lot of stuff at the game. It's a new game. You gotta do it. You gotta have your demo decks. You gotta have like all your YouTube stuff. So there's like a pretty funny demo video that we watched, and we just sort of tried to piece together like, oh, like is this how a game is meant to be played? And then there's no dueling book off the bat for games like this as well. So you have to play your tabletop, your untap. It's like pretty common, I think, in a lot of like the more
of the
niche games,
secondary
like the
games,
not
right?
top three games. Yeah. So
I
like
got pretty
that's
lucky in
the main
that
one.
there's already a UFS tabletop. So nobody had to
Mm.
make one from scratch for My Hero. There's just already one for UFS
Yep,
because
that
that
was
game
that
has
out
been out for
for
so
quite
long.
a
Yeah.
while. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, for Battle Spirits, yeah, it was basically just I looked up a YouTube video on how to play. I learned how to play. It was just simple.
Mm.
It was as simple as that. And
Yeah.
then I read the cards, and I think what's interesting is like I think that's kind of just like what it is for most games nowadays. There's so many resources out there for you because the internet is just like so vast with people that is very easy to learn. Like it's just like, oh look, this thing is a thing that has interest. There's a Discord for it where everyone like they have hundreds of people talking about it. So like there was just a Battle Spirits Discord you can join and watch what people are saying, and as soon as and then we downloaded like Tabletop Simulator, and we played and watched each other play games, and I think within like the first week of playing we decided what the like two best decks were, and those are the two decks that like won each of the events. Like we thought like red and white, these are the decks that are probably really really good. Um, and these are the decks that won these $25,000, $10,000 tournaments.
So
Hmm.
one thing I think someone who's more experienced definitely has the advantage in, or that I guess I would say like we have the advantage in versus somebody who's like very new is like you two are probably more proficient at determining what information is valuable and what information isn't. Like you probably have a better filter when you're going through looking at what everybody is saying. You
Hmm.
can probably when somebody says something just outrageous and incorrect, you're probably able to analyze it to a degree that you can tell. Obviously
Yeah.
not everything, like you can't immediately know how
So,
everything
some of
works,
it does
but
come down to like actual like gameplay and like tournament
yes.
experience, right?
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
because like it's just more a means to like accelerate the testing process, especially when you don't have the the reps. It's the same with Yu-Gi-Oh, right? It's like when
Mhm.
we have a good enough understanding, then everything sort of comes a lot quicker, and like you sort of take the technical play and tournament experience aspect for granted, which was unfortunate. That was sort of like my issue, like playing the launch event. So this game isn't out yet. They had like a big launch tournament, like Jeff and I said.
Basically, the
Um,
tournament, like the $25,000 tournament, was their pre-release.
hmm. So like you sit there and you play. So like when we played on tabletop, it's like we weren't timing a lot of the matches, and obviously you're not really looking to push for penalties against people for playing slow, and like that. Even when you did, like I think there's like inexperienced judge stuff and stuff like that, where it's like it's all transitional. So when you're just like, hey, my opponent's taking a long time to like tank play out their turn, or like they're trying to figure out how this interaction works, it's like, yeah, that's expected. The game isn't even out yet. And you're like, okay, fair enough. So, like, obviously, one, you're playing like slower. Two, there's more draws. And like tournament structure never really conducive for draws and events like this. It's not like Pokemon where like, oh, end of match procedure, you draw. It's like, well, they're not doing like top whatever, and there's no like champion points or challenger points, whatever they call it. It gets a little bit more dicey. And that was like, I think that's the biggest like transition thing where it's like Yu-Gi-Oh! You know what to expect with end of match procedure. The game will be won at one point, and you sort of just play it out. Whereas like, yeah, for Battle Spirits it was way different from tournament experience to like playtesting experience, because of like, one, like opponents experience in the game, and then two is like little interactions that we might have missed from like more experienced players. Like for my tournament, people from Hong Kong traveled and they had played normal Battle Spirits in Japan, so by default they might have had these skill sets that transition into like Battle Spirits Saga. That's like the differential, is Saga in the name, and like some other things. But so like they just already are ahead, so they know like how trading should work, like like efficiency, like in game, just little things that you would transition from like Yu-Gi-Oh to this one. But like obviously, if you're doing it from normal Battle Spirits to Battle Spirits Saga, it's probably a lot better for them. So they just steamrolled the entire tournament because they sort of like knew where trading would come from, like how to curve out properly, and like when to be the aggressor in different spots where like we sort of know the concepts but don't know like it in practice efficiently.
I mean,
That was like the big
people
thing.
going to these tournaments had never played a game in real life
Mm.
outside of like proxying cards,
Yeah.
right? To whereas these people had. It's no different than like the Japanese who have played cards way
Mm.
before us and like going to worlds, right? They're just more experienced with like these cards because they've been playing with them for months before us. Except in this instance, these people have been playing for years. So the thing is that would just
But
come.
I think so. Like, there's like little differences, right? It's just more of like interactions and just knowing like how game mechanics are meant to work. So like, if you look at Yu-Gi-Oh, right, and it's like, oh well, like what benefit does someone who played 10 years ago have over someone who started playing in the last like 2 or 3 years, right? And it's just like really
Oh, honestly,
small things.
I think someone who played 10 years ago would not be able to beat someone who played in the
No,
last
no, 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 no. So, but like, no, saying like that person has been playing like concurrently from the last 10 years, right?
Oh, sure,
Like,
sure.
what skills like do you think someone would gain from playing? Even just like a different card game in time. It's like what skills are transferable, and like what things would you need to pick up over time? And it's like, I think the really so again went over this in another podcast as well, where it was like you say you played in 2000 and I'm trying to think of a year where like the power creep wasn't as relevant, but like I guess like the good marker is just like probably like one of those nice like trading formats. Maybe not 2012, but you get the gist of it, right? Maybe not 2011, probably like before then. Let's say you're playing like a weird monarch-ish format where it's just like you have the understanding of when to be the control and when to play like the aggro sort of game, and like when it's just appropriate to like make a push, not make a push. When do you get punished by certain cards, whether it be like Gauze, Torrential, Mirror Force, stuff like that. And that comes with like understanding of like the cards in the format, understanding of like how they punish you, and then sort of like just general game awareness, right? Like just understanding what happens if I do this, like, oh, I'll have no cards. Like that goes
Yeah.
back to the concept of like card advantage. Just like,
Back to, like, what
is
you
it
told
okay
me.
for me to be the aggressor and like all of these sort of like weird niche things? And when you're just like fresh Yu-Gi-Oh player and Yu-Gi-Oh hasn't really, had too much benefit from situations like that, then like it's I guess like maybe the person from 10 years ago is like, back in the day we used to do this, this, and this, and like maybe your attack ordering differs because of how like I think people still do it now, but like they attack smallest to largest because of Gauze, but then there's like other little niche things of like I'm attacking in this ordering because like if this one gets chump blocked by a guy in, say like they just do something in like a Yu-Gi-Oh game, it's like they chump block and then it has this effect and this will happen. So like it's adaptable, right? And that's sort of like what I was gauging when I watched like the people from Hong Kong play is like they just knew the base level of like these interactions happen. It's not the same game, but technically it is. And like that's sort of like where Yu-Gi-Oh is at now. It's like Yu-Gi-Oh is not the same game it was 10 years ago, but someone from 10 years ago might have learned some lessons 10 years ago that might apply now. It's just little things that sort of go with it and sort of gives you like edges. And that's sort of like where we're at, right? It's like the boomer mentality of this happened long ago and it can still apply now. But like, will someone who started playing 2 years ago know this interaction? Probably not. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think that
Yeah.
tangent
That was
was
a
a little
lot.
excessive.
That was a lot, and I'll be honest with
Mhm.
you, I'm not sure I followed all of it. I
No,
will actually
I'm
have to
gonna.
I will
You know
actually
what?
have to listen to this back.
You know what? I would have to also, but I'm not going to. I'm
Uh,
I'm just gonna assume that what Boden said was correct.
Yeah, me too. I think I
uh,
get what you were getting at, but
mhm.
But
yeah.
No, Ryan, you definitely know what I'm getting at because you exclusively play with Yu-Gi-Oh like old people. You just play
Oh,
like
yeah.
yeah.
They
You
do
know what I mean?
things that just I just go like, I know why you did that because
Yes.
20 years ago
Yeah,
that play
pretty
made
pretty much.
sense, but
Yeah.
old man, your time is done.
Yes, your time is
Yes.
done, but when it does come up, right, you would
Yeah.
just sit because you're like,
Yeah.
oh shit, I remember this one niche interaction from 20 years ago, and that might be related to any amount of autism that is spewing through your bloodstream. Like it's like, hey, you know what? I do remember what happened 15 years ago at that locals with this one minor interaction when I played Necros versus this. Like, interesting. But that's the only thing you remember. It's like you don't remember where you put your keys or anything. You just remember that one game at locals and it'll transfer, and that's what I love.
I
That's
okay,
why we
like
love
so
Yu-Gi-Oh.
let's get back to talking about the games that we're
yes.
playing.
Yes.
Uh, so anyway, yeah. I think one of the reasons we wanted to talk about this is that it was just very odd that we all started trying to like get into other games at the same time, and I would like to try and address if there is a reason behind that. Do you think there's like a distinguishing factor of why that is a thing?
Um I know what you're getting at, but I don't necessarily think so I I have been kind of like I don't want to say jaded with Yu-Gi-Oh for a little while, but I think it was more so like I was kind of maybe on my way out of Yu-Gi-Oh. Then the pandemic happened and there was no Yu-Gi-Oh. So then it was no longer my choice to stop playing. And I felt like, man, I have to keep playing now that it's back, right? Like when
Mm-hmm.
events came back. And obviously it was a lot of fun and I enjoyed it. And then I just think like Yu-Gi-Oh has no longer been fun for me because I can't play it at a more casual level. Like it just doesn't agree with me anymore. Like if I play like a casual deck, like when the Crystal Beast structure deck came out, I tried to play at my locals for a few weeks with the Crystal Beast deck, and it just wasn't good. And therefore, even though I was playing cards I liked, I wasn't having fun. I just kind of sat there
you're
looking
getting like
like,
try hard pub stomped by the dude at your locals playing the full power deck, right? Which is
yeah,
fine. That's how Yu-Gi-Oh is
that's what
meant
that
to
is.
be.
Yeah, and that's fine.
That's why we have
But it's
part of
just
the underdog format in Edison
yeah,
and everything else. It's like
yeah.
we're not gonna gatekeep. You know what I mean? Like that shouldn't be the thing. Like no one should be gate kept because they're playing a more expensive deck from playing like a normal locals, right? Like that's the whole intention.
Yeah.
Which is why I think it's kind of like funny when people are like, yeah, we didn't enter locals during tier format. Like we just didn't have a good deck and tier was destroying us. It's like, yeah, I guess, but like,
Well, I mean, I guess
you know what
because
I
for
mean?
me,
Like,
it's the flip side. It's the flip side of just like if I play a lower power deck at my locals, it's not fun because I'm just
no,
playing a terrible
yeah,
deck. And if I just
exactly,
play my
right.
real deck at locals, it's also not
That's also
very
no,
fun
exactly.
because then
But
I'm
like
just doing
that's not
that
to
to
say
other
like some other
people.
people get fun from like different,
Yeah.
different aspects of like Yu-Gi-Oh,
So
right? Where it's like, yeah, it's weird.
like the only fun I have playing Yu-Gi-Oh now is playing at a more competitive level. It's like I don't even have fun going to regionals. Like those also just feel not fun to me. I
Well,
only
I
really
can't
have
remember
fun.
the last time any of us had fun going to.
Yeah, I just think like playing events are where it's fun for me, right? And there's just so much time in between events that it's like it like playing the events is the only time that I get enjoyment out of the game. But preparing for events feels like a chore,
It does. Okay,
right?
yes, yes.
That's the problem because the actual game to game doesn't interest me as much. I had a lot of fun preparing for Mexico and Vegas because there were new cards and I really liked figuring them out. Right? Whenever there's a new set, I generally really enjoy it because I like looking at the new cards, trying to figure stuff out, and it's new to me. Whenever we're getting to like the second or third event of the same set, generally I just get very
We've get
bored.
checked out. We've already
Yeah.
checked out.
I've mentally checked out. It's no longer
Yep.
super interesting to me. And I just go like, well, this is the fourth event I've played with this deck. Like, uh, oh well, you know? Because then it also gets to the point where sometimes it feels like it's like, oh, well, last event, I think my deck was really good and I did really well. But did I do well because I was actually playing well, or did I do well just because my deck was better than other people? And then the event later, when everyone's decks have gotten better because the format's been going for a month later, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, I feel like now I'm just flipping coins because both of our decks are very similar. And as long as somebody's not doing anything like egregiously bad, sometimes it can feel very coin flippy, but that's every card game, right? Like when both players play perfectly, the game comes
Yeah.
down to
What
who
else
drew
do you
better.
have?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
that's what that is, right? And that's fine because it's very unlikely both players actually play perfectly, right? Like that's where the excitement comes from is like min maxing and really optimizing and making sure you're actually playing perfectly. And I will say at the 250th, I didn't play a lot to prepare. I really phoned it in and I didn't play well. And I lost a couple of games that had I been more on point, definitely could have won. And I was
I
out.
think
I
that
didn't
also
even like I was out
comes
pretty
back.
early because I didn't practice, I didn't prepare, I didn't play well, I wasn't interested. And that's on me, you know?
That comes back to like the people. So like when we talk about the people who are doing well, they just play like religiously, right?
Mhm.
Like the people that are doing well just play
And
on
that's
dueling books
fine.
all
They
the time.
enjoy it. And
The
that's
people
fine.
who are
That's
doing
fine.
well are doing the same things that we did when we were in our early 20s, where
Yeah, and
they
that's
lived
what
and
you should
Yeah,
do.
but now as well though, like so when you grind Yu-Gi-Oh now, I
Mhm.
think it's more glaring that you see the flaw because it's like a little bit more frustrating because it's like when I would play it beforehand and I'd play on like on Dueling Network, Dueling Book, whatever, and I would make an effort and like when when my win loss just dropped to a certain point, I was like, like I need to reevaluate something. Now it's like, oh, my win loss is at a certain point, and I sort of just ride it off to variance more than anything. Where it's just like some of my games are literally unwinnable, or it's like I bricked, it's like, oh cool, and that just like that was like more of the market that I have now, less of like technical play. But I guess like you can't get better technical play unless you are playing. It's really like it's a very slippery slope, It's like you play more, you figure out the game is significantly worse than it was before, but you play more, you get better at the game. So pick your poison, right?
Yeah, sure. But to basically, I think to answer the question, just like why I started playing a new game, it's because I wanted a low stress locals experience that I don't
Mm,
think I can personally get from Yu-Gi-Oh anymore because I no longer possess the off switch for Yu-Gi-Oh. If I play
yeah.
not a competitive deck, it just frustrates me because I've been playing it for so long and I've spent so much of my time, for lack of a better term, min maxing the game,
Mm,
that when I try to make something, like very, very casual, being a Crystal Beast deck with 2 copies of Rainbow Dragon, not even like a competitive, not even like a more competitive version, literally one with the explicit purpose of summoning a Rainbow Dragon and then going like 3-2 at locals, or like, and I just go, did I really have fun doing this today? Like, not really. This was just like, I don't know. And I just wanted to be able to play a locals. I guess because the other thing is what I like most about these games and Yu-Gi-Oh and whatever is also getting better.
mm,
And when you've been playing a game at the level we have for so long, the improvements are so much less noticeable, to the point they're borderline non-existent. And obviously me playing Crystal Beast at my local does not help me improve. Like, I don't learn anything that I can, like try to incorporate into my strategy for the next event. So
Right.
when I'm picking
The,
up a new game,
Well, it's also like, what are you learning, right?
yeah,
well,
Like
no,
I
exactly,
was
exactly.
going to say the
yeah,
learning aspect of Yu-Gi-Oh is going to be very minuscule to us. But instead of learning the ins and outs of Yu-Gi-Oh, instead what someone who was like us would be learning would be the individual plays of
Matchups.
a deck
Yeah.
and matchups and how
mm,
certain interactions are. The
Mhm.
the fundamentals are all pretty much perfected by
Yeah.
all of us, and so because of that, everything is secondhand nature.
as
The
bad
only
as it
thing,
sounds as well, most people at your locals are going to learn more from you entering that locals than you're going to learn from them, right? Like
Yes,
that's like
yeah,
the big
sure,
that's,
thing.
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I agree with you,
And
but
that's not a bad thing, but it's like, you know what I mean? Like it feels like more of you're sitting there and going through the motions, whereas like other people are just gonna be like sweating playing against you, right? That's
yes,
like
no, that's
the
exactly what
other
it is.
downside.
To the point that it, like, yeah, to the point that it, like, I still go to locals and just don't enter, and I just
I was
hang
about,
out with
oh
people that
yeah.
I've met. Like, there are, like, I've met a lot of my closest friends through Yu-Gi-Oh that I do a lot of stuff with outside of Yu-Gi-Oh, and now the percentage of time I spend with them playing, doing stuff that isn't Yu-Gi-Oh is significantly higher than playing Yu-Gi-Oh. But there are still some people I've met at the locals that I like doing Yu-Gi-Oh things with, and I'll just go and not enter the locals and just hang out with them, and that is still fun to me. It's just the actual act of sitting down and playing 5 rounds of a locals to me is just such a, like a such a Herculean labor of just, it just
Yeah.
feels so daunting. And it's like, and it's just crazy that, like, when I've been playing the My Hero locals, I sit down and I've played like 20 games total, and I just sit down and play, and I learn something about the game, about my deck,
Well,
about their
learning
deck,
is like
about
where you get
anything.
your fun from,
That's where
right?
I get
That's
my
Right.
that's like
fun
the
from
big
it.
So
thing.
Yeah.
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 this is where I wanted to go with, like, for me and somewhat Ryan, the fun of Yu-Gi-Oh for me is building a new deck and trying to get it to work. It's like the puzzle problem solving
Yes,
part that
absolutely.
that is
Absolutely.
fun.
Mhm.
And when you can't do that, it is very frustrating for me. Like, for a long time, if I couldn't do that, I would like go into a depression that I couldn't enjoy the thing that I loved most in my life because it just, the format or whatever was going on just did not, was not forgiving or acceptable of the fact that, like, what was good and what wasn't good was not.
Mhm.
Um and so I have always found myself reaching out into other games because I want that whole puzzle solving aspect to tickle the back of my brain,
Mhm.
Mm.
and because that's what gets me going, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I think like another thing, that I think I'm a mixture of both you and Bohdan, where like that's my aspect of you, and I think what I'm about to say resonates with Bohdan more. Um, there was a League of Legends player who very famous who decided that he was going to retire, and a quote. I don't play League of Legends, but this quote really stuck out to me, that he said. Uh, it doesn't feel as fulfilling as when it did when I was younger. It seems like everything is going to be great if you win, but the joy of those achievements is very fleeting. And that has been Yu-Gi-Oh for me for a very long time, where the winning achievements never felt as good as I thought they would be. The first win never felt as good as I thought it was going to be. The second win definitely didn't. The only one that felt kind of good was my third one because it was a unique tournament. And it's just, I think that it's an artificial joy, and it doesn't really matter as much as people think it does. Especially, I mean, at least for me, because the things that bring joy to me the most are like the building decks and problem solving.
Mm.
And I think that quote also just resonates with Bohdan as well, because we're both like similar in age and been playing the game for a long time.
It's mostly so like you guys have like the whole deck building characteristic and you want to solve the puzzle. Mine on top of that, it's like I'm happy if there's a deck that I can build that's unique enough that has like these discernible skills compared to other decks in the format. That's always fun, right? Because that's like another edge that you have. But when there's like a one deck format, but there's like little intricacies to it, I like that. That side of the coin where you just sit there and you play a bunch and you pick up little technical play things, and obviously like that can sort of just like devolve into some degeneracies and like people doing main deck counter picks and stuff like that, but that's irrelevant. It's just like the build up to it. And I think that's sort of like what we had with tier that I can sort of appreciate, where it's just like, did I think I was the best player in the room? No, but I would think that the jump isn't like too significant given like the amount of gameplay you can have and the stuff you can learn, how good of a player you are in general. And that's what I really enjoyed. You know what I mean? Like when the game lets me do that and I feel more in control with my gameplay and less so having to depend on like deck building edges and stuff like that. Because as we've noted before, it's like unless your deck building edge is like that significant, it's mostly going to be like tech choice and matchup dependent and everything else. And that's sort of like where I get disillusioned when the game feels more out of control and like my deck building choice is more relative to what my opponent is playing and less of like the gameplay itself. It's sort of, yeah, it's hand in hand. And I don't know, it's tough. It's tough to explain to like not a low level thinker, but just someone that hasn't played as long as we've played. I think it gets kind of jarring. It's like, oh, just don't play. It's like, yeah, it's not that easy. Like,
Yeah.
uh,
So I think again that the original question that brought all this was, why do we think that we've been brought to this point where we want to try other games? And I
mm,
think, after all of that, I think a lot of it again comes back to, it's something fresh that isn't solved, and being able to put our time into something to get results, I think is something we all enjoy. And for Bodin and I, the a lot of money doesn't hurt either, right? Like,
Yeah.
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 I think like again, it's because I was involved with like Flesh and Blood for a bit, and like I played that, and I think that game was fun, but like obviously there's other issues when it comes to like the competitive aspect, right? And it's like, do you have enough time? Like how deep is the game and stuff like that. It's like I couldn't fathom playing competitive Magic now, and that's like not related to like the game itself or like anything. It's just like it just feels like it's too far gone, and the skill sets you have to pick up, it seems like you're already just behind. And then the benefit of playing like a newish game, like in its infancy, is that you were there on like the ground level. right? So you can progress, and it's like when you have experience in other card games, your progression becomes like a little bit faster than most people because
Right.
it's all
So like
adaptable.
yeah, so like I mean, with a new game, everyone starts out at the same level, and when you've
Mm,
been playing card games, especially Yu-Gi-Oh, for as long as us,
mm,
we're going to be at a higher starting point than everyone else, right?
mm.
Um, and I think that's also something that's appealing.
Yeah. It's just like seeing what you've learned over time from even just like any other games, right? Like you said, you played like Forcible and stuff like that. Like I've dabbled in like Magic, other Bandai games, Flesh and Blood stuff. All of like the games where it's like none of these things are like the other, but they're sort of all just the same. Like and then you just say, let's try and apply it to this one. And if it's fun initially, I think it's like worth continuing playing, right? Like I'm still here. I went all in. I'm like, I'm gonna get 4 of every copy of the cards from set 1. I was like, why wouldn't I? And now
Yeah,
I just like have access to every deck because that's like another thing I think as well. Where when it comes to something like a game with a deeper card pool, it's like you have to get those cards. Like if you play on an online sim, and then you proceed to like find this like weird tech card that's from 10, 20 years ago. You have to go out of your way to get that card. And that's like another thing that makes it sort of jarring, like transitioning into new card games is like if this game only has 3 sets, and you're looking for a common, and I think Ryan talked to us about this, where it's just like someone at your locals would just give it to you. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
when there's 3 sets and people are
Oh,
opening so much product and there's not
that's
that many
been
people playing.
that's been my experience of just
Yeah.
like to make my deck, I need
Mm,
4 of 15 different commons from sets 1, 2, and 3. And I just go like,
mhm.
I don't know how I'm gonna get these. And
That's
somebody's
but
like,
that's not to say
oh,
that doesn't
and they pull
happen
out a
in
5
Yu-Gi-Oh,
row
right?
and they have every common from every set. And
Yeah,
it's like, oh, there are only 4 sets of this game. You can fit
yeah.
that in a 5 row and just bring it to your car to locals.
yeah,
You
But
know?
but for
And
like Yu-Gi-Oh,
like
that happens as well, right? Like
yeah.
I'm sure people have just like given you cards from like new sets, like
Yeah, of
who cares?
course.
Enough is open. But like when there's a big time lapse in between, I feel like it's
Yeah.
way more like awkward when you go to a YCS and it's like, oh, the hot tech of this weekend is a common card from 30 years ago,
Yeah.
right? And it's like,
Yeah.
okay. Like I guess we have to, go back in time and open the packs. It's like, nah. Like one vendor will have it, the card will end up being $40. And that's again, like that's not where I don't like Yu-Gi-Oh, but it's sort of like goes into like, oh well, if you're playing a new card game, why wouldn't you play one of the big three like Pokemon's a different one because of rotation. But like maybe Magic is like something more relatable.
Pokemon's also boring as shit.
I think Pokemon is boring if you played actual card games, not boring if you're at like the top level, but I think that also comes with like the territory of like you actually like grind it and there's benefit to grinding Pokemon, whereas like grinding Yu-Gi-Oh, you either do well or you don't, right? That's
Yeah.
where it gets kind of awkward. So
Sure.
no.
All right, that was a lot to
Yes.
unpack, but I think I do think we brought a lot of points. So this was a much less Yu-Gi related one than usual, but
Mm.
hopefully some of our ramblings were useful to anyone who is either on their way into a card
Well,
game
to
or
keep it Yu-Gi-Oh related,
uh-huh.
let me ask you a question.
Okay.
What have you seen in these card games, specific or any card game over the years that you would think would be worth transferring, not transferring, sorry, like adding to Yu-Gi-Oh? Like off the top of my head, I can think of like a wealth of things, but like Ryan, what do you think My Hero has that Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't? That sort of like
Uh,
not necessarily draws you, but like you think is like a net benefit for My
well,
Hero versus like Yu-Gi-Oh.
I think I know
so
what Ryan's going to say.
I
Oh,
do
easy, yes.
think what? This is crazy. What are they what?
You were gonna talk about the alt arts and the tournament packs.
I
Yeah,
wasn't.
I
I
was gonna
wasn't
say the
because
tournament packs.
that's not what
Oh.
I thought you were talking about. I
Oh,
thought you
okay.
meant
Well,
like
it can be related to like
However,
gameplay or
okay,
anything
okay.
else. But
Well,
like,
however,
yeah.
I am gonna say that now, but then I will. I thought you were talking about strictly gameplay. So
Oh, it
one of the
could be
reasons
either
why
or.
I've had
Yeah.
such a great time playing these locals is how the My Hero organized play works. If you enter a locals, you get 2 tournament packs for entering. And I know what you're thinking. Well, that just sounds like an OTS pack. Yes. However, um, these are not just reprints. These are mechanically unique promo cards. So imagine when mega tin imagine when tins used to have promo cards, like, like Norden was like in the tin or whatever. Imagine instead of Norden being in a tin, it was like in an OTS pack. That's kind of what My Hero does. Norden is an extreme example that obviously is an incredibly powerful card. It's just one I thought people would remember existing. But like basically the OTS pack cards are promos that are playable, and you cannot find them in booster packs. Since I've started playing very recently, there haven't been any crazy promos, but there are a couple that I do play in my deck. And now you might be thinking, well, once the tournament pack goes out of circulation, wouldn't the cards be impossible to get? And then it's just the exact issue that Bohdan was talking about. No, because what they also do is if you enter tournaments and locals, you get points on your account. So my Jasco Games ID or whatever, I get 50 points every time I enter a locals. Right now, I believe I have 300 points because I've entered 6 total. And you can spend those points and they will mail you commons of old promos. So once a promo is no longer the current promo pack, the promo packs have foils and they're random. So you get foil ones and they're random. Once the promo is not the current set's promo, you can spend your points to get common versions of them on their website for free, as long as you can spend your points. So there is a card I need for my deck that I need 4 copies of. And after entering 4 locals, I had enough points to get them. And in addition to them mailing them to you, I'm actually going to what is the equivalent, I guess, of a YCS for My Hero this weekend. And you can redeem your points in person at the events for the promos. So I need this promo for my deck I intend to play at the event, and I can redeem my points and they will give me 4 copies of it. And I think that is just the coolest thing. And it's just probably any game could do this. It's just since this game started their tournament play a year ago, everything is online, everything is linked, and they're just using all of these modern systems. In addition to the mechanically unique promos, they have other promo packs that are prizing for different tournaments where they're alt art of meta cards. So that's kind of where like the OTS pack that Yu-Gi-Oh has kind of falls into to place here. Is every set they have an alt art promo pack also, and those cards look insane. And I think that is super cool. And I really wish the whole OTS pack system would change to be something more like this. I really wish there'd be more value to entering locals. And I also think getting points for entering locals you can spend on promos is also a very good idea to just reward people for playing your game and making it fun to play a locals. Like, it's not fun when I go to a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament and get one OTS pack and open a 40-cent super rare of a card that's unplayable. And I just go like, yay. Like that's like, great.
So I think if you relate that on the scale
Mhm.
of where we're at in Yu-Gi-Oh though, it would probably end up being the same when it comes to like the tournament pack
Probably.
itself, right?
No, as in terms of value, sure. I
Yeah,
agree
but
that they'd be
I think
giving out
the
too
point
much and they'd
thing
have
is
no
good.
value.
I think the structure is also like pretty reasonable as well. That's like a big thing that I've noticed with a lot of these games as well, is just like they love doing alt odds, different rarity. Like some cards will just have like 4 or 5 different rarities, right?
Mhm.
And that one can be okay to an extent. It can be really cool sometimes. I'm on the ropes with some of that stuff. But I like the idea of like an event pack, right? Like, oh, you topped, you get something special. The
Yes.
battle spirits, when I topped, I got a full foil starter deck,
Oh, that's awesome.
right? Yeah, like it was like starter. I think it's like starter or demo deck. I don't think it
Sure.
has one card specifically.
Yeah.
And then another pack that was just like, so they have the tournament pack, and the cards come with like silver embossing, sort of like foil on the card. And then if you do well in the tournament, I think it's like top 32, you get an event pack that has all of the cards from the promo tournament packs, but it has gold instead. So it differentiates like, hey, this one is from this tournament that this person did well at. This one is from
this event without like a set code identifying. It's like,
They
these are
have-
from the same set. This
they have
has
those
gold, this has
too.
silver, this has altar. You know what I mean? Like,
all
and
of
I think that's
the
good enough.
all of the promos, all of the entry promos, if you get first after, because the locals don't really play out Top Cut because there are not enough people and it's a locals. If you get first after Swiss at the locals, you get an additional promo pack, and it's called a victory pack, and it's the same pool of promos, but there's a stamp on it that says victory that you can
Yep,
only get
I
for
like
winning a
that.
locals. And I think that is super cool too. And it's like, imagine if the OTS pack cards, imagine if there could be some that just had a stamp on it that just said like OTS champion or whatever. Like that
Well, even like relating that to like we went back to when Jeff was like, I went undefeated in Swiss at the two the 200th or something, right? Imagine they have an event pack for the YCS, and it's like,
Yeah.
Well, I've been saying that for Infinite. I've been saying
we have
Top
all
Cut needs.
talked about that
Yeah.
before.
I
No,
think
but
YCS Top Cut
even
needs
just like at a
special
base
packs.
level, imagine that's there for regionals or something.
Yeah.
And
Instead of an
there's like,
OTS
here's
pack,
the
it's a
extra benefit.
YCS pack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's I've been for Infinite, I've been saying that would be, in my opinion, the easiest fix for YCS prizing is just top 32. Here's a couple packs, maybe like 4. And then, oh, you won in top 32. Here's a couple more. Oh, and then if you win, you get like 20. Like I don't know. And they're just they're just slightly different.
Give it like
OTS
a makeshift
packs.
bounty appeal to it when you're in Top Cut, right? Because there's no draws and a loss knocks you out.
Yeah.
Have it be like cumulative, like bouncing up until you get like 32 of them or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think that would be something that would be fun. And I always try, like obviously everyone's like, how do you make tournaments better? Give $1 million for first place. Like, no, we can't.
Oh,
we can't do that. It's like,
right?
It's just like, I just feel like making a special promo pack seems feasible. Seems like something that could be done.
Feasible. If lesser games can do it, one of the biggest franchises of all time can do it.
Lesser games is crazy, but I guess you're right.
Well, if they're not the big three,
if games that are not the big three can do it,
then sure, that's fair.
For me, I think looking at more in terms of not participation pricing, because I think that's like kind of overdone. I'm just trying to get up the grand open pricing, because like, so this event is 512 person cap, but you're giving out stuff to like the top 128, the top 64, just little like arbitrary pricing that might add a little extra admin to an event, but realistically shouldn't, because like you just have your prize wall and people can collect it whenever, right? That's like another one. If it's all attached to like your Neuron in Europe or like, some side deck account in North America, I think having something for the people that make day 2 similar to like the UDS, right? That's
pins.
like another thing that might be interesting.
There was
not pins, but
I'm saying that's
behind that.
But I know what you mean. Yeah. Also, the first remote YCS, randomly, to my knowledge, this is the only YCS this has ever happened.
Gave a day 2.
There was a day 2 field center, and it said day 2 on it. And I've never heard of a YCS having day 2 prizing other than that. Like day 2, because I also think it's like day 2 is something that a lot of people like view as an accomplishment.
Or not us,
no,
yes.
Well, I think you also
who are new
for granted as well, where it's like some of these people make day 2 with topping records day 1, and then they just like lose the backdoor 2 and don't top, and it's like
feels awful.
Okay,
yes, feels terrible.
Yes,
you should just get something.
Yes, like exactly.
Just
right?
make
so,
it
like,
feel less bad.
Like,
soften the blow.
Prize for day 2.
Yes, no, I agree with you. Just a little, even if it's just a field center, just a little. Just have another for strike. I mean, not anymore. I guess because they did that one.
No, don't say that, because then they'll do a field center and we'll still feel bad.
You're right.
No more field center. No more mats. We don't need any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
Dice. A YCS branded die?
Potentially.
Die that says YCS on it?
I think that would be okay. You can never have enough dice.
Yes, that one I think you can never have enough of.
Okay, I think it has to be cards, because it's
a token.
a Yu-Gi-Oh trading card game.
A token.
Token is weird, but yes, maybe.
A token. It says YCS day 2 on it, a token. And then one that says top cut when you top. Let's do that. Maybe.
Yeah. I would be okay. There's some of those
Yeah.
some of those like the judge tokens and the Konami top
I
1000
don't
Kazi
think they
tokens.
make judge tokens anymore.
But no, but I'm saying like some of them were like scarce enough where over time, if you if you like do it properly, they can retain value.
Yeah.
And it's like good for the player base. You want things that are like they don't have to sell them instantly to like recoup losses because like that's generally what happens, right? But like it's something if you keep over time, it retains some value and you're happy.
Yeah.
Like I look at some of these top cut playmats and I'm just like sick. I'm like, who wants these? But like tokens, someone might need 4 of them. They don't need 4 playmats. You know what I mean? Like that's a big one to me. Like tokens are always like if there's a nice token, like a top cut token, why wouldn't I get 5 of them?
Sure.
Right? Like yeah exactly.
Yeah. It's actually funny that you mentioned judge tokens. Randomly on my desk right in front of me are a bunch of different judge tokens.
Which
I
one?
just I don't even I have
What are the numbers?
23, 22, 20, and 15 randomly. Anyways. I just thought it was interesting that you mentioned that just as I happened to be flipping through stuff and there was just a couple of them. But yeah, I don't know why they haven't done these. They haven't done these in a while though. I think they kind of I don't like that they default to field centers now instead of tokens, just like in general. You know, like I would prefer tokens.
Okay, so you do technically need a field center for gameplay now, so it's like
Not
having
if your
more of
mat
them
has
out there
zones
is
on it.
fine. No. So like the idea is like basic level of play is
Sure.
just like here have a field center
Mhm.
and that's fine. I don't like it when it's at the top level of play because that makes no sense. Everyone playing should already have these. It's not like a realist like I don't think
Yeah.
it's a real cosmetic to me at this point. It's like I have the field center I use plastic from Japan. It was the first field center they ever released and I'm going to use that until the end of time. I don't care.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? It's whatever. Yeah. Jeff, what do you think is something like other games could adapt to Yu-Gi-Oh that maybe we've missed out?
Okay, well, I'm gonna say something I've said before because it really makes me mad, and it's that
Mhm.
every other game, even the big other like Pokemon and Magic, every cycle or something with that come out with new mechanics for their cards and how their games work, and Yu-Gi-Oh just hasn't done that in forever, and they keep making the same things rehashed with different artwork, or they'll combine 2 other decks into one, and then they'll make Tearlaments, and then the game is ruined for a year. When it was just Shadalls and Lightsworn mixed together, and I find that really fucking obnoxious. And so that is what I wish Yu-Gi-Oh would do and take from other games is stop doing the same things over and over again and start creating some new shit.
It has been almost 6 years since the new mechanic. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I always say this. It doesn't have to be a new extra deck type. There can be other ways to do stuff. Like
Oh, I had a crazy one come up when I did my pod with Max in Europe, Max Solom. So like I said to him, what if the new mechanic is just a fix to like so instead of trying to figure out a way to explain this. So when you go second, let's say you have well not like the option but you like almost guaranteed you can scry the top card and replace a card in your hand and then you put it to the top or bottom, and that is like your fix for one
Drawing a
seeing
hand trap
the one
is your
extra
sixth.
card.
Yes.
Sorry.
Drawing a hand trap is your 6th and just losing.
Yeah, no, exactly, right? So now you have the option to fix your top card. Your 6th card is now known in your hand, but you're not gaining any advantage from it. Like you're still drawing your 6th card, but it's like you have the option for like Nibiru as your 6th, like it's in your hand now. And I think that is like probably a reasonable like rule fix that maybe Yu-Gi-Oh could adopt that doesn't warp the game too much. Like maybe that's what we want, like who knows. But it's something very simple that I think could be introduced and could just be like another dynamic that maybe we haven't had before. And now like you look at the percentage chance of like it's their opening 5, like opening 6 technically, and yeah, you sort of just go from there.
I truly
I
think you should start with 6 and not draw going second instead of starting with 5 and drawing
that.
1.
Well,
I just think that would be so simple.
That's the other solve, right?
So simple.
But I think like this, like not having mulligan in the game and having like the option like draw 1 and then take a card from your hand, including, you know, the card that you drew, and put it on the top or the bottom,
Sure.
right? And that's just like, you still start
Wait,
with
wait,
5.
wait, wait. I need to ask
fix
you a
your top
question.
card.
Wait. Do you mean that like the person going second starts with 6 cards and doesn't draw
No,
per
no, no.
turn?
That's what I
No,
mean.
so like the
That's what I
person
mean.
going second cycles a card in their hand, essentially.
I'm asking what Ryan means. That you
Yes,
just
Oh,
start
that is what I
Ryan.
mean.
Oh,
yes.
sure, sure, sure.
I'm saying if you go
I
second,
don't
like-
I think you should start with 6 and not draw for turn.
So the turn player draws 5, the second player draws 6 and doesn't draw per turn?
Yes. So you don't have the situations where you're drawing a hand trap as your 6th. You just have 6 and you see all 6.
But then we complain, I
And
drew
then
it as
you-
my 7th anyway.
Well, no, but you don't draw.
No, you
so
don't.
that's
I know,
not
I'm
a
messing with you.
thing.
I'm messing with you. I'm messing with you. Yes.
So you start with all 6 that you would have had access to normally, basically.
Mhm.
That's what I'm saying. I think obviously Yu-Gi-Oh is not fixed, and going second does not become 50% when that happens. But I think it just fixes. I think it fixes. Like something I actually learned a lot about that I think is sort of correct when I read a lot of the Hearthstone developer like blogs, and something they mentioned that I didn't think about for a while that I think is actually like crazy is sometimes how something feels matters more than the actual math behind it. And by that I mean drawing Ash as your 6th feels the absolute worst.
Mhm.
However, there are definitely times where had that just been in your hand, you still lose. It just doesn't feel as bad. When you have all 6 and you Ash them and you still lose, you just go, man, I lost going second. When you draw Ash as your 6th, you're like, oh my god, I drew a dead card. It could have done this. Maybe it could have done this. And now just like it's the mental damage is worse than just losing the game. And it just feels bad, and it creates these negative play experiences that like losing is not an exclusively negative play experience, and winning is not an exclusively positive play experience. And truly, a lot of the more fun games are when there is more actual game being played, win or lose. Obviously, winning a close game feels better than losing a close game. But when you lose a close game, you're not, I don't think there's as much mental damage there than just getting blown out, right? And I just think any of these little steps that make games feel better.
I don't know. I think I'm way more likely to look back and criticize the longer games than the short ones, because at least in the short ones, I know there probably was nothing I could have done.
Right, but when you find there was something you could have done, then you think, I could have done better.
And then
right?
you feel real shitty that you fucked up. And I know we've all
I
been
think
there.
it's the opposite. I think I feel worse when there's nothing I can do. Maybe.
I
No,
know.
yeah.
I
So when
beat
I
us
make
up.
a mistake, at least I know that I don't make that mistake at like ever
Yeah,
again. But I
yeah.
you know, you probably will.
Yeah.
But I think like Ryan said, if it's something out of my control, I feel a little bit worse because it feels like that's just everything in general.
When it's
right?
out of your
Like, when
control, you
stuff's out
just
of your
go, why am I
control,
even here?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know. But I imagine it's different for different people.
I
But
mean, I'm just thinking of like if Bohdan's in the finals of Worlds and he looks back and realizes he fucked up and could be a world champion. That's gonna feel really fucking bad, way worse than if Bohdan just got
right. That's a
blown
different.
out.
That's a unique experience.
That
I
one,
think.
yeah. I think more from just like general gameplay. So like it goes back to like, when we go to locals, it's like, what are you learning? If you're making a mistake at locals and it resonates with you, I think that's beneficial. Whereas if you
Yes.
just get destroyed by, whatever deck at locals that, probably can never do well at a YCS, then you just sit there and think, why did I get out of bed today?
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, why did I put pants on? Like, it's
Yes.
really just
Not-
like, that's my mentality.
Not
It's like,
that verbatim
obviously,
necessarily.
if you make a mistake
but-
in a specific, like in the finals of anything, if you make a mistake, it's really difficult for you to live it down because like that's just such a specific spot. Like Ryan said, it's just like the top. When you can't just say when I'm in the finals next time I won't make this mistake again. It's all very arbitrary. You can only adapt it to the next game that you play where that situation will come up. And like it just so happens to be that you were in the finals and you made that mistake. That's your learning experience. That's where it gets kind of dicey, and you're probably sick. But that also comes back to I think like that's the other funny one where it's like, I opened the nuts like round 2 against person who literally entered for the participation playmat. But round 8, I opened bad. It's like, yeah, that happens. Like, that's what are you gonna do? You can't pick your hand in a specific round.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, I think that, I mean, the only other thing I want to talk about is what Ryan talked about with his game, the reasons why he enjoyed it. I don't think Burn and I really talked about Battle Spirits and how we enjoy it.
Do
At
you
all. We
enjoy
kind
it?
of
I enjoy it from like just the whole learning aspect of like a new game, and it's like problem solving, right? Like you have all of these new puzzles you have to figure out. But
I also
I
think the
think the
game's
mechanics are
mechanics
fine.
are unique enough that it
Mm,
makes it feel fresh. And I mean,
mm,
as we play, like that might change. We might think like, okay, like, this is just getting ridiculous. I don't know if I like this or not. But I mean, the whole mechanic, like the game is played with uh cores, which are little counters you use to pay for your cards and like boost them and give them special effects. And no other game really kind of has that right now.
mm.
So it allows for some kind of like unique um, some unique stuff to happen. So
Yeah.
that's why I like it. I think there's potential there to be a good game, but I think Bandai has messed up with a lot of card games in the past. So I will not hold my breath to see how this goes.
I'm a little more hopeful just based on like how I've seen Battle Spirits in Japan. It's just like a game that they support, and like the R&D behind it isn't terrible compared to some of the other games. Like this game was made by someone who worked on like early Magic sets and made a bunch of stuff that like a lot of people would have played. Like he was involved in like Duel Masters and like all of the other Wizard offshoots of like Harry Potter TCG, Neopets, and all of the games that you probably didn't know existed, but Jeff and I did because you went to a locals in 2004 and they were just everywhere. But yeah, it's like I think that gives me a little bit more hope, and that was sort of like the same thing with Flesh and Blood. Is like I knew the people involved with a lot of like the R&D and like just the game design process, and it's like I know that they know what sucks from a gameplay perspective. And like whether or not that translates well to like a casual level or like a competitive level, that one's like weird. But it's less of like, oh, this is a game behind an IP, like most other games that we sort of see come out of Bandai, where it's like Digimon or Dragon Ball, and it's like a whole like marketing ploy. This one is just like standalone card game. You know what I mean? Like this, they're not selling you anything but the cards. And I think that's like when you sort of see a little bit more freedom and a little bit more fixing and all of the other stuff. So like I'm hopeful for it. I could have my hopes dashed quite quickly. So who really knows? Yeah. I think another one as well, just really quickly, is from your like short experience in these games, or we can relate it to like other games as well. Like, what are the things you think Yu-Gi-Oh does correctly relative to these games? I think is a big thing because we're sort of like singing the praises of like the new card games, like like this is cool, but it's like we're not talking about the negative aspect. I have a big one that I would like to bring up at Ryan if you want to talk about
I mean,
anything
if
in
you
My
have one
Hero that
in
you think
mind,
could be done
go
better.
for it. I have to think a little bit. I
Oh,
think.
I would
oh,
also
sure,
have
sure,
to
sure.
think pretty heavily on that.
So I think my big one had to be uh the tournament experience was like fine. It's like any other big tournament, but Bandai organized play and like policy documents. This is not related to like gameplay itself, more of like the like the OP side of things. So their end of match procedure is 3 turns or 5 minutes, whichever one finishes sooner. And there's no checking life to determine who wins the game. It's just a draw if there is no clear winner. But like the crazy thing that I've noticed is it's not like, oh, 5 minutes and like the end of the current phase that you're in or something. It's like, no, no, no. Like if the timer ends while you're attacking for lethal, the game is a draw.
Hmm.
Yeah, so
Sure.
it's like that becomes like a point
Could
of
have attacked
concern, especially
faster,
like
Yugi boy. Something,
yeah,
something,
quite literally.
something,
But
something.
like
Summon skull. I don't
mechanically,
know.
yeah, mechanically these games are like less like micromanaging click actions and stuff like that. So like a lot of the time isn't spent playing cards, it's more like playing back and forth and playing to not die. There's like basically 4 ice shields that are essentially generic just because of how the game is designed. So like you can go for like game ending pushes and just get turn skipped essentially. Well, not like turn skipped in that sense, but it's like you end your turn, you get threatening roared, congrats, like try again. And then it's
Yeah.
like your opponent now has crackback, and like it's sort of just like that'll happen a couple times when you get to like a late game, and then like the end of match procedure doesn't really work out too well for stuff like that. I think one of the biggest comparisons I drew was just like you take a Japanese game, which like essentially this game is, and then you adapt it to like Western audiences for like competitive play. And when you look at Japanese games, Yu-Gi-Oh included, their tournament structure in Japan tends to not be um like as good. It's more related to like how the game should be played there. So like in Japan, it's like Yu-Gi-Oh! End of match procedure is like almost non-existent, right? Like you watch them play so slowly. There's no slow play. There's no nothing. And then obviously you translate it to Yu-Gi-Oh! In like the Western side of things, like TCG North America and Europe and stuff like that, where your games can and will go to time. Sometimes by design, sometimes by like people just actively playing slow. And I think that's just like a general flaw when you like take a Japanese game where it's built for a tournament structure that's like locals only, right? Like that's just how it is. You're only ever getting like 5 or 6 rounds out of it. So that's just like a little thing I noticed. I think Battle Spirits definitely suffers from that. And like you don't really see it in games like Magic or like Flesh and Blood and stuff like that. Just more like Western approach for gameplay. It's like I feel like time is relevant, but
Well,
it's not
well.
the
Also,
same
you have to keep
extent.
in mind that like Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, they have had years and years and years to perfect the competitive aspect, tournament aspect, right? Whereas that is not the case for many of these other games, especially the Japanese ones, where there is no super large thing. It is mostly locals, right? And their like big tournaments are still held in like shops until they're like world championships most of the time. Um, so I think it's one of those things where it's going to take time for any sort of game getting into a hyper competitive space to get that sweet spot of their kind of their rules for time and tournament and stuff like that.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see if they also figured that out too in terms of like, hey, maybe like so I'm pretty sure there was 60-minute rounds, and it's like 60-minute best of 3 in this game for like set 1 at least felt like it wasn't enough, but obviously that just can't be the case logistically. Like there's other factors at play, so it's whatever. Um but yeah, like seeing if they're adapting policy and little things like that where it's just like, what if we increase the amount of rounds in like our breakdown? We have this many people, we'll have 1 extra round. Like, will we increase the top cut from top 8 for this one to top 16? Sort of like where Yu-Gi-Oh was at in its infancy as well, where with like, do you remember? I'm sure you remember this one. The transition from a top 8 cut for Shonen Jumps to a top 16 was
Yeah.
probably just like the most ridiculous thing. And then like think about that 16 to 32. And now it's just always a 32. And I think that's like crazy for me to think about. Like just going back, it's like I remember when X1 might not have topped the YCS.
Yeah, that's crazy. That X1
Yeah.
might not top. That is insane.
I was just thinking about that recently because we were looking back at we were talking about Max made the joke that some of Jeff's tops would be in high school now. They're so old. And I was like, yeah, like I went to the third Shonen Jump of all time, which was in Ohio, and I went X1 and got like 15th place or something like that in the very first one. And thinking back then, like it was only top 8, and I back then I was like, oh, well, I went X1, I didn't top. But now, like if I went X1 at an event and didn't top, I would be pissed.
Oh yeah, you'd be sick.
Yeah.
that's
Now
so
people are
that's so
complaining
insane.
about like, oh, I went X2 and didn't top, and I'm just like, yeah, I guess. I don't know. Like, but then, it's
Dude,
just very,
somebody I heard
very
somebody the
transferable.
250th complaining that one of their friends went X3 and didn't top, and I'm sitting there like, what?
Mhm.
I'm just like, what is
So funny.
happening?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean? What? Anyways, yeah, it is definitely a different time. I think I don't really have an answer for that for you right now. I think I will maybe have an answer for you once I have played my first big event for this game. I think, well, big maybe being relative, but I think next week after I've played my event and I've played a premier event for this game, I'll have an idea of what I like or don't like about the tournament structure.
That's
Hmm.
fair. Well, like, yeah, tournament structure or like literally anything else like that you think just stands out that you want them to change, I guess. But
I think the
Yeah.
games are so different. I don't really have anything like gameplay wise.
mm,
You know, like if I could come like I don't know. There's I don't really know in terms of gameplay because the way they play is so different. Like also this game's on set 4 and Yu-Gi-Oh's on set like 75. You know, like
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't like it's just so far gone.
But
I
like,
don't even
so I,
know.
I think that's like the other cynical thing that comes from playing card games for so long is like I don't think I know everything when it comes to like picking up a game and just sitting
Yeah.
down and playing it. But
Yeah.
it's like obviously you've seen some shit over time and you can just like look at a game and be like, "Oh, I don't like this." And it's easy to just not play the game, but if there's like some redeemable qualities and you play it, obviously you have an idea of like, "Oh, I think this should change or this should change." And when it's like early days, you sort of just like sit patiently and hope that they also feel the same way. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
that's sort of where I was at with like a bunch of games. I'm like,
Yeah.
man, I wonder if they'll change this. And when they do, you feel like very, vindicated. It's like, oh, this is
Sure.
awesome. Like this is great.
Yeah. I would say that how this game works in like the very 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 basic thing is
Mm.
you essentially every deck has to mill to like play its cards, and sometimes you can mill poorly and sometimes you can mill well, and obviously you can build your deck to mitigate that, and the best decks are the ones that get punished the least from those types of things happening, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I like the deck I'm playing, because the deck I'm playing can rearrange the top of my deck, so it very specifically, has a lot of ways to play out of the unlucky mills. But I like, obviously when every single deck in the whole game has a mechanic involving milling, there will be some times where you just go, "Huh, I guess I lose." You know, like, but I will say, after playing like actual constructed decks as opposed to just playing like the demo decks, it's much less relevant than I would have originally thought it would be. But obviously, you can still have some crazy swings of just like, it's generally just one of those things where it's like one every 10 games you might mill 3 bad cards in a row, and then you're like, oh
Mm.
well, I could have played out of 2 of them, but 3 is crazy, and it's like you're losing it. It's essentially like, oh, I lost a 60-40 roll in my favor 3 times in a row, and it's like, oh well, that doesn't usually happen,
But it did.
but once a tournament it will, and it's like, okay, so that's something. But like Yu-Gi-Oh, same way, like you can just draw bad in Yu-Gi-Oh, like it's whatever. Like every card game has that. It's just, again, in my opinion, the way it's presented in this game can sometimes feel worse, but I don't necessarily think it's any more or less likely than just drawing bad. I mean, yeah, and like the better decks in Yu-Gi-Oh are the ones that brick less often, generally. Like
Mm.
if a deck bricks a lot, it's not going to be a good deck. So same kind of concept, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I gotcha.
So I mean, that wraps up what I wanted to say. I mean, I feel like that was actually a lot. We talked a lot about things I didn't actually expect to talk
That's
about. I
me
don't even know
too.
how long
I
it's gone,
didn't. It's been
but
gone
We
a
had to
long
make up
time.
for the month that we didn't do
We
a
did have to make.
podcast.
Yeah, this was 2-in-1. It's okay, but I think we had a lot of good stuff that we talked about, just not necessarily relevant to current meta Yu-Gi-Oh, but hopefully it was interesting to hear our
well,
thoughts on other games and
I
such.
hope that the people listening enjoyed not Yu-Gi-Oh
Yeah,
talk,
yeah.
and if they didn't, they can let us know in the
Yeah.
comments.
So I bet we have low retention on this episode because there's so much not Yu-Gi-Oh.
Mhm.
So I do think it'll be very few people. If you remember last time, I purposely put the question in the comments in the beginning of the video. So I might make like an annotation or something. I'm not even sure if those still exist in the video where, like, in the beginning. But yeah, I guess I'm kind of interested if anyone else. I think the people who are still watching at this point would be the ones that play other games and are interested in listening to what we have to talk about other games. So if you are still watching and you play any other games, or even if you've just thought about playing other games and don't yet, I would be interested to hear what other games you play, why you started playing them, or if you don't play other games, why not? Or if you're getting into one, why did you get into it? I know that's a lot of instructions, and I apologize, but just talk about any other games you play besides Yu-Gi-Oh, or if Yu-Gi-Oh is your only game, why is that? Whether it be people get you into them, and I think a big aspect of it is the social aspect, and a big reason why I didn't play other games previously is because I thought it would be difficult to get other people to play the game. Like I've taught most of my friends that I see in like in person frequently how to play the game. So they like know the rules, they just don't have decks and they don't play. But I have been successful in teaching them, and we played with some starter decks and stuff like that. But yeah, and I'm sure if I do well at this tournament, they'd probably be more interested because they'll be like, oh wow, Ryan actually like put in some time in the game and he understands it now. Like maybe we can play it. So
Right.
that'll probably be a big thing if I can actually do reasonably well. I'm not expecting to do well. I have no idea what's going on, and I'm just clicking buttons and throwing darts at the wall. But
I'm sure we'll get an extensive tournament report.
Oh,
from
you will.
Ryan.
Oh, you will.
I
It'll be like
can't wait.
round 3, I suck. Like that'll be it. Round 3, I lost. I'm terrible. Yeah. Very good.
I guess something we can talk about next week. Hopefully, we can talk about like Tournament in
Master Duel. Right.
in
I didn't want to talk
Master
about
Duel,
that
yeah.
today, but I think it's too late.
I think I would like a week for it to simmer because
me too.
I gotta tell you, it is probably like the least fun experience on Master Duel ladder at all.
Yeah, let's give it a week, and we'll see if you.
I feel like I'm gonna put this out here now for anyone that is listening currently. I guarantee you, some of these cards will get hit in the next like month minimum.
Yeah.
I think they're like, oh, we made a mistake. Like, oh,
probably.
See ya.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
All right. Well, that should do it. Thank you, anyone still listening. Even if you're not listening, thank you for making the view count go up. If you even clicked on this video, thank you. But yeah. So I think next time we're gonna talk about hopefully my experience playing a tournament of this My Hero game. Now that I've spent so much time on it, and then I'll be able to answer Bohdan's question about what I think certain games can do better or worse than Yu-Gi-Oh, or one of the main ones. And then I think then we'll be on week 2 of tournaments in Master Duel, and then maybe we can even look at Cyberstorm Access a little bit because we'll be we'll be closer to that. We'll be 2 weeks away actually at that point. I think we might even do it.
We'll probably have reveals at that point as well for like any exclusive stuff. Could be interesting.
The sneak peek is at the end of the month, right? Or when is the sneak?
Yes, like the end of the month, and then releases like the first week of May.
Yeah.
I think that sounds right. So let me confirm real quick. Yeah, so the sneak peek should be the weekend of the 29th and 30th. So if we do it like middle of the week next week, it'll be a week out from the sneak, and hopefully we'll have seen reveals of some of the TCG exclusives and the imports.
That'll be fun.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So it sounds like a plan. Thank you all for listening. If you're still here, I commend you. I'll try to get this up as soon as possible on Spotify. It's going to go on YouTube immediately. I'm going to try to get it on Spotify quickly, but it might take a while. But yeah, so thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time.